Hello, everyone, and welcome to the hockeyprospect.com YouTube channel. And this is our first podcast of the 2024-2025 season. My name is Jérôme Brad, and I'm joined by my co-host, Brad Allen. Hello, Brad. How was your summer?
Hey, Jérôme. My summer was long. We don't get downtime here. We're not golfing, so it's a long summer for sure. Still building the scouting school, so that was basically my entire summer. It still is up to this point. And but it was good, for movie enthusiasts out there. Like we've had a hard time with the Alien franchise, but Alien Romulus came out. It was actually decent. First time in like 20 years. I'm sorry, Prometheus fans. A decent Aliens movie came out. And Terminator Zero followed that up, and Terminator Zero was like one of the best things I've seen in a long time. So that made my summer a little bit better because it's been pretty exhausting, but it was good to get some downtime, a while, catch up on some TV and some movies, and they're actually not too bad.
Yeah, on my end, also pretty short summer. TV wise, some show. I mean, one show that you and I have talked about is What We Do in the Shadow. So that's the show that I start watching this summer. I'm a bit late on it, but I think season 6 is starting in October. So I watched other show, but that was probably the best show I saw this summer. Basically, we're back. Brad and I did like a few show just before the draft. I think people kind of enjoyed those show, and so big news for this year. We have a new podcast. Brad and I will be here. We think weekly, unless life events or traveling or anything like that. Some week we might not be there, but I think our goal is every week to be do a weekly podcast. And obviously, if you're watching this, you'll see the name of the podcast. It's on the background of this video. So, Scouting Sessions will be the name of our podcast this week. We're pretty excited about it. I feel, Brad, we've been talking about this for 4 years. Like we have wanting to do this the right way, and I think this year is the best time to do it for us, and we're both pretty excited about the upcoming season and doing definitely more podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to be able to brief everybody on a weekly basis about our process more often and how we operate, and just more of like the intricacies of scouting as a whole, because we're fortunate enough where we do get to actually travel to events. I'll be going to the U18s, probably U20s as well this year, internationally traveling, and it gives us an opportunity to give you some more behind the scenes about different prospects and what they're like sometimes off the ice, and more about just the process in general and what goes into it.
Yeah. So for today's episode, so basically we are on the website at hockeyprospect.com. We have released our team by team prospect depth chart, which is a top 10 rankings for each NHL team, their top 10 prospects. So folks can go on the website to see where we have ranked guys. We also have updated all the ratings for each players, and also it's a pretty cool thing to do for us as a scout, because it can be pretty good for our own ego, and also can be pretty bad for our own ego, because player development can go both ways. It can go really well for you, and it can go really bad for us. So you'll see in our rankings we're not shying away from our draft year rankings of those players. We do put where we rank those players in their respective draft year. So I think it's a pretty cool ranking for fans, and even for scout. I think you can learn a lot from your past success, your past failure. So we're pretty excited about this. Just so people know, we're gonna do 4 episodes like this. So today is episode for Team Pacific, and in the tomorrow will be Team Division Central Division, and then later in the week will be the Atlantic Division and then the Metropolitan Division to finish the week. So, but today team will be Division Pacific, which there's a lot of good prospect in that division. So let's get started with the Pacific Division. All right, we are ready for the Pacific Division, and we're going to start with the Anaheim Ducks, a team that has a lot of good prospect, as you see in the top 10 here. Pretty good crop on the top 10, I think. Obviously, you got two frontline prospect at the top here with Beckett Seneca and Carter Gauthier. I think both guys are. You can make a case for. We put Seneca number one. I think maybe the hockey sense being a lot higher is probably the difference maker here. But both guys have potential to be, top line player in the NHL. Deben Clara is a guy that we've been pretty high on since his draft year. Brad, you saw him last year as well in Sweden. So he's a really good prospect. Maybe one of the more underrated prospect overall, even goalie prospect in the NHL. And if you look at later in the list, Zellweger, Solberg, Luno, like three solid defenseman prospect. And then you have Gaucher, who's more of a depth, a physical defensive center that could play easily as a fourth line center, but you could probably get to be a 3C at some point. And then you have three skilled forward to finish the top 10 here with Pedersen, Sidorov, and Massey. Brad, who's your spotlight player for the Ducks?
I would say it's probably Igor Sidorov, based off what I've seen and with his curve. So I remember seeing him at 16 out of Belarus, and he was okay, and he looked like maybe a fringe player or a watch at that time. And I watched him when he came over to the WHL, and I thought he just missed. So, again, he was a watch. He was somebody who I was going to watch the next season. And then, ironically, I didn't watch much of him at all, and then he gets drafted. But before the year he did get drafted, the big thing with him was he wasn't very well-rounded, and he still isn't. But his execution rates have gone through the roof since I initially saw him. That's the big takeaway since I've caught up with him this past off summer. This summer specifically, I took some time to be like, okay, he scored 65 goals. How did that happen? And the big takeaway for me is that I underestimated his skill set. I didn't realize just how talented he was. Not the best skater, probably about below average. But not terrible either, especially when you get some time and space. You can get up to a decent top speed when he has open ice. It's more the edge work and the lateral agility and the small area skating that's got some issues. But the big thing with him is if he can learn to simplify his passing game and recognize when to make short area passes so he can set up a shot at a higher rate at a pro level, then he has a real chance of becoming something. If things go right, he could be that dark horse in this organization that out of nowhere you get 25 goals from. So he's a huge one to me. That's kind of a wild card. And when you look at curves, I think he's got one of the better curves in this organization when you look at their top 15, 20 prospects, if you keep going down the list.
Yeah, they have a lot of good prospects. Some guys did not make the list. I think of Tyson Hines, who was a guy from the Q that, I have some time for. He's big, mobile defenseman. But they have drafted pretty well in the past few years, and they're starting to have a pretty deep prospect pool. And I think a lot of good things are going to happen in Anaheim in the next few years. Just need to, get everything to work together. And obviously, it's not just about the prospect, but they're going to need some good veteran presence to play with those young players. But pretty solid prospect pool. If we move to Calgary, we didn't do a draft review last year, but I think Brad and I think we're in the same boat here. We really like what Calgary did at the draft last year. Maybe the best draft of all teams, but it's just not. It's not really something we do, giving grades after the draft. But just looking at what they did, we're pretty impressed. They had a lot of picks also, which always helped your cause. But if you look at their top 10 prospect here, Zane Parekh, obviously, Dustin Wolf, a goalie that we have been pretty high on since his draft year in 2019. Looks like it's go time for him with the Flames this season. So probably the last time you'll see his name on the prospect list like this. Matt Coronato is a guy we also really like in his draft year. Pretty safe prospect. And then you get some boom bust type potential here with Anzek at number 4, Gridden at number 5, Suniev at number 9. 3 pretty similar prospect in terms of like upside, but also there's some risk with the 3 of them. And obviously, Kirill Zarubin was our number 1 ranked goalie last year. The Flames got him in the 3rd round. So overall, it's a pretty solid prospect pool for the Flames. Brad, as far as your player spotlight here, who do you want to talk about?
Bradley Nadeau's running mate there in Penticton, Adar Suneyev, when he was drafted out of Penticton by Calgary, we were pretty high on him relative to a lot of the consensus, and I still am. It's just, it really comes down to skating. He's a heavy set kid. He's a bigger kid. Takes some time to get up and running. He kind of skates with the piano on his back. Right, he's got a bit of that to him. But in terms of ability, it's very hard to find a player who plays the style he does, the power game he does, with the finesse he has, especially with his handling speed and his ability to see options. So I think long-term, when you look at developing power forward in the organization that has a tremendous amount of potential, it's Suneyev for me, especially when you look at them versus Matt Baker-Dean or even Samuel Honzik. Like, Suneyev brings a lot more of that power factor to him, a lot more of that energy factor to him, which could see him actually really long-term maybe end up better than them. Right. So it's one of those situations where I think Calgary has a lot of hidden weapons. Like this past draft, one player I didn't know who was drafted in the 4th round, Trevor Hoskin. I was like, who's Trevor Hoskin? So I ended up watching a couple games of him after the draft, and like even what they got there is very interesting. They got a unique group, I would say, with a lot of well-rounded, unique players. There's a lot of different types of players within their crop, and that's kind of what you want, right? You want a player that you can plug into different areas of the lineup, and that's what they have in their prospect pool.
Yeah, and I'm looking at their list, and I just mentioned Dustin Wolf will probably be in the NHL this season. Jacob Peltier will be in the NHL if he's healthy. Unfortunately, he got really unlucky with injury in the past year, actually the past 2 years. So he should be off that list the next time we do one. And Coronato, I don't think he's far off NHL. Being a regular full-time NHLer. So, but they have other guys outside that top 10 that will move up, and they have pretty good depth as far as prospect goes. So if we move to our next team, we'll stay in Alberta. We're going to talk about the Edmonton Oilers. Not the best prospect pool, let's be honest. But one thing is funny is that if you look at the top 4 that they have here, Matt Savoy, Sam O'Reilly, Bo Akey, Vasily Podkolzin, 3 of those 4 players were not part of that organization when Edmonton was playing in the final. So I think they have done a pretty good job quickly getting some new young player. Savoy was in a trade, Podkolzin in a trade, and then they trade up in the draft to get Sam O'Reilly with the last pick of the 1st round. So to be fair, like for the Oilers, I think those are the interesting player to me, like at the top. If you look at completely the opposite of what we just talked about with the Flames, there's not much depth here. The player lower, like we don't really think any of them will be full-time NHLer. But it's going to be interesting to see Savoy play. Like he was a top 10 pick 2 years ago. He just got traded for basically a third-line player. So his progression has not been tremendous. Maybe he has. Maybe that's one of those players that's his peak. Earlier than most players. But he still remains a pretty good player. Who has a lot of skating, a lot of skills. Pretty good shooter, good passer. But how much better is he now than what he was 2 years ago? That's a bit of one of my questions I have for him. Obviously, if he plays in Edmonton, very good chance he's going to play with some pretty good players in their top 6 group. So that should be, really helpful for him. So Brad, who was your spotlight player for the Oilers?
Max Wanner. So Maximus Wanner is a name very few people know. He was a 7th-round pick, and he didn't get an opportunity to play a lot when Edmonton took him. But his development was very good. I liked his progress. This was his first year in the AHL this past season. He looks like he could be a third-pairing shutdown defenseman with some puck-moving elements. Occasionally, he will flash something at the line that sounds unexpected. But I was really impressed with him on his retrievals and exits. He has first-phase deception. He knows how to slow down opposing forecheckers. And he's a pretty intelligent player, and he's got a good base. So I think he's done well too in rookie camps. Like he looks the part. He's one of those players where one day he could make a lineup in a top 6 on the back end, and everybody goes, who is that? And it's Maximus Wanner for me.
Yeah. If I look at that list, obviously Boeke got hurt last year, so he didn't really have a chance to play a whole lot of games last season. So that's going to be a big year coming up for him. Vasily Podkolzin, I mean, you and I just love that player in his draft year, and he's been, a bit unlucky in Vancouver. I mean, I think he played in the NHL full time in his rookie year, and then he's been in the minor ever since. I know he got hurt last year, Brad, where I think you were telling me he was playing some really good hockey in the AHL, and I don't know, I'm really curious to see how he does this year. That he was one of our, favorite player to scout back in 2019. What do you think about Podkolzin and maybe his second chance at the NHL with the Oilers?
I still believe in him. I really do. I think there's something there. We missed a Saston. We wouldn't be a top 10 in a redraft in any capacity. But could he still be a depth winger that's good enough to actually remain in a lineup in above replacement level and be useful in playoff hockey? I think so. There's enough there. He still has his one-timer. He's still tenacious. He still has the opportunity to set up unique plays from time to time with his playmaking. He's a bit more rigid than I think we expected him to be in terms of his physical growth rate. So he's not so good in one-on-one transitional handling plays. So he doesn't break down defense as well as I think we expected. And his playmaking rates have not really ever improved. So those are 2 things that are kind of lacking with him. But I really think that he has potential to still be like a bona fide full-time NHLer. I really do. So it's just one of those situations where sometimes, for whatever reason, prospect doesn't really flourish in an organization. They get the opportunity to switch, and that gives them the opportunity to mentally recalibrate. And when they do, then they take off. And I'm sure that's what Edmonton fans are hoping for.
Yeah. If we move to the LA Kings, obviously you guys see the ranking here. Brent Clark at number 1, Liam Greentree that they just drafted in the first round. Interesting part about that ranking here is that you have 3 goalies in the top 10: Eric Portillo, Carter George, and Anton Slukinski. So I don't know how many teams have 3 goalies in the top 10. I think 1 or 2 more do have that. I think maybe Columbus might have that too as well. Obviously, Brent Clark is their big time prospect here. If I remember well, if we go back to his draft year, like he was not one of our favorite prospects. Obviously, we knew the talent was there, but we didn't really like the skating. We didn't really like the defending. So I'm really curious how is he going to look at the NHL level when he plays full time. Super talented, obviously. That's never been the issue here, but some concern with his skating for us, and obviously his play in his own zone was questionable at times for us. And obviously, at the end of that top 10 here, you have Alex Turcotte, who was the 5th overall pick in 2019. A bit similar to Paul Kozin, as just it has not worked out for him at the pro level. I would say Paul Kozin has been better at the pro level than Turcotte. Turcotte just played, I believe he played about 20 games last season with the Kings. Obviously, like, he's not going to become that number 1 or number 2 center than that, what we thought he was going to be in 2019, but he still does work hard, play with some good energy, so he might still have a chance as a depth guy at the NHL level. And the other guy is Samuel Elenius at number 10. Again, not a super talented guy, but he's incredibly massive at 6'6", 220 pounds. We think he has a chance to be probably a 4th-line center that can kill penalties and win some face-offs. So, Brad, who is the guy you want to maybe spotlight a bit more here?
Cone Zimmer is for me the dark horse here. It's been interesting for LA because they remind me a little bit with the Rangers, where the Rangers grabbed Capo Caco and Lafreniere, and they had Kravtsov, Lundqvist, and everybody was like, holy, this is going to be an amazing rebuild. They're going to be stacked. And it didn't work out that way. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way. And with LA, Alex Turcotte's development has not gone smoothly. Arthur Kaliev, we were a bit lower on him. And well, now some of you see why, right? The 200-foot game isn't there. He's basically just a shot at this point. So, some of their development is just, and then there's players that we thought, honestly, we're going to play at least for sure. Like who was the Swedish defenseman they took in 2019, Jérôme, their first rounder at the end of the first mid-20s.
Tobias Bjornfot.
Tobias Bjornfot.
Yeah.
Tobias Bjornfot. So, Tobias Bjornfot, I thought for sure he'd at least be a third pairing insulator. He was a great skater. He was accelerating his development in his draft season, and that hasn't worked out either. So it's one of those situations where LA has had a couple of high-end prospects that were expected to be impact players that have fallen a bit flat. And so this next wave is expected to come in. And, it's one of those situations where, for instance, Brent Clark's an incredible talent, as I'm sure some of you know, and he's one of the smartest defensemen out there, and just his offensive ability is second to none. However, he will be the shortest defenseman that suffers from severe knock-knee syndrome that's in the NHL if he plays full-time. The other is Nick Hague. Nick Hague is 6'6". So it's one of those situations where it's going to be a trial by fire for him when it comes to his retrievals. And it is interesting how he has adapted his game so that he can retrieve pucks with his knock-knee syndrome. For instance, he does a ton of hesitation, spin-off and bank passes to himself so that he can try to mitigate the forecheck and try to evade the forecheck without using his edge work as often. But the other aspect that's interesting, when you have a player that has to use 10-2 turning, like Brent Clark does, or have an open hip line as often as Brent Clark does, they're usually susceptible to getting clipped. Matvei Michkov, who's not knock-kneed, but does do a lot of 10-2 turning, was hurt as a result of this. It's another issue with Demidov, but for different reasons, which we'll get into once we hit Demidov's profile here. But the point is, LA's prospect pool is interesting and very, very different, but some of these players are like almost unknown when it comes to how they're going to translate in the NHL despite their talent level.
Yeah. If we move to another California team here, San Jose Sharks, we just mentioned Calgary having a really good draft. I think San Jose also had a very good draft last June. Obviously, Michael Salabini at number 1, no surprise there. Will Smith, Sam Dinkinson, Yaroslav Askarov, Chernyshov, Quentin Musty, Wallenius, Weisted. So this is a very strong prospect pool that they have. Salabini and Will Smith starting their initial career at the same time with the Sharks this season. It's going to be pretty cool to watch how they do this upcoming season. I think it's going to be challenging because I don't think San Jose is going to be. I think San Jose will battle for possibly most likely another number 1 overall pick at the at the 2025 NHL draft. So it's going to be a work in progress, I think, for the Sharks and also for Celebrity and Smith. It's not really their fault. It's just there's surrounding and playing with good players. Very interesting top 10. I think the top. I'm pretty excited about maybe the top 7 is really solid. I think. Brad, anybody you want to maybe mention a bit in more details here?
Well, I mean, they're stacked. There's a lot we could talk about. Leo Wallenius for me is the underdog right now. So Wallenius came on for us at the end of the season. We had been monitoring him since he was there with Alphonse Frey over in J20 on the same team. But it's one of those situations where his toolkit wasn't very good. He's not a natural athlete, so his ability to get off his center line quickly isn't there. So he has to be very reliant on his spatial awareness, and he's not a very good defender. So it's like, average toolkit, not great defensively, not very intense either. That's a recipe for us where we really usually drop a player, but this kid understands how to control the flow of a game. This kid's very intelligent, anticipates his time and space, and it's just one of those situations where sometimes a cerebral player just can overcompensate for their toolkit to the degree that allows them to get in the NHL and maybe remain in a top 4 capacity. And for me, that's Wallenius. Wallenius is one of those offensive stabilizers, meaning he's an offensive-minded defenseman, but he does it in a way that makes sure that he's not overly liable. He's not a liable player, so it's not, his turnover rates are never going to be too high. He's basically the opposite of Alphonse Frey. Right? Alphonse Frey is a magical skater, and he's going to be able to skate himself out of bad situations, but he's also going to put himself in bad situations more often, right? Where with Wallenius, very calculated and very intelligent. And so, yeah, the game is definitely leaning towards toolkits and speed. We're seeing it every draft now. Teams are, even at the goaltending position, teams are starting to get terrified of any goalie that can't even really skate that well in their initial draft year. Do you have an idea of the significance of skating now? It's going right down to the goalies at an unprecedented rate. So imagine what it is for defensemen, right? But I think Wallenius is one of those outliers that's going to get away with his average skating at the NHL level.
And he's a guy that you and I really struggled with last year, scouting him all year, and it's like at the end I think we just like decided by the U18. I think we just said, okay, this guy is just too smart. We know he's not the most. I guess because he was playing often with Alphonse Frey, we always compare both of them. They played together on their club team in Vaxel and also on the U18 national team. So and Frey is such a beautiful skater compared to Wallenius, and he's such a, he's a freak of an athlete. So the comparable between the two of them it was a bit tough for Wallenius, but the more you watch, the more you pay attention to Wallenius, the more you're like, this. I think this player gets it. And like you said, he has offensive upside, but he's not super flashy offensively. Unlike Frey, just obviously the skating does play a role in that. But he's super calm, doesn't make a lot of mistake out there. So it's going to be interesting to see how he does this year compared to Frey. Again, we'll compare both players against this year. And if we move to the next team, Seattle, obviously Seattle, if we're looking at their top 10 here, Shane Wright, Berkeley Catton, Riker Evans, Mitsinen, Nyman, Wintertown, Villeneuve, Rakoff, Fixer Mulgard, and David Goyette. So that's a pretty solid top 10. Obviously, you see Edouard Sally not in there. He has been a bit of a disappointment in the OHL, and he's not someone that we were really high on in his draft year. Obviously, the interesting part here is there's a few guys that I think we like. I think Yanni, I said Nyman, I believe, but I believe it's pronounced Newman. Yanni Newman, big power forward out of Finland, a guy we like back in 2022. We rank him 33rd. He went 49 in the draft. He has progressed well. I don't think he's far off the NHL. He might need maybe a year in the AHL, but he's not that far off. he's also like a pretty massive player physically, and also I really like the Mitsinen pick by Seattle last June. Seattle got him in the second round, 40 overall. We had him ranked 22. We really like this player. I don't know if that's the guy you wanted to talk about, Brad, but we're both pretty huge fan of Mitsinen here.
Absolutely. We love the Finns, right? Yanni Newman, Miettinen, very different players, but those are two for sure that we thought Seattle basically stole at the draft. I think Newman's progressed extremely well up to this point. One thing with Yanni Newman is like, okay, yeah, he's heavy set, a little bit of Eder Suniev in him from that perspective, where his first 3 steps are very slow. But once he gets going, it's okay. The big thing with Newman, though, is his shot quality. His shot quality is spectacular, which means he's not going to have to drive net front as often as most theoretical power forwards that have his frame. And that's because he's really not one. Like, he's 6'4", 210. So it's like, oh, he's going to play a power game. That's not his game. He's a finesse-oriented distance shooter. But he's a very, very skilled one. I had the opportunity to see him a lot in Messis in his draft year. I think he was very underrated because he performed much worse internationally than he did in league play. And so I was banking on the idea that the player that we would develop would be the Mestis version, and so far so good. So that's one that's looking pretty good for us. But the other, I'll say, like, this is a pretty deep. It's a pretty deep pool. There's a lot of good looking players here. But let's highlight one player that we really thought was super underrated, Jérôme, and that's Nathan Villeneuve. That's a player that was way lower to basically everybody we talked to in the actual industry was like, whoa, that's really high, guys, right? Nathan Villeneuve, most people don't think much of him, but it's interesting because when we talk to people about him, the way that we would describe him is pretty different. We saw this, we watched a lot of him, and from our perspective, he had a lot of untapped offensive potential. But for most other people, they think of him as kind of like a, kind of a vanilla style north-south power forward that was a bit smaller. So that's, I think, why he fell a bit. But obviously, Seattle took him in a pretty high spot. So it'd be interesting to talk to some people behind the scenes from Seattle and see how much they'd agree with us on certain points of him. But he has the potential to be an incredibly useful player in this organization. Is it likely to be top 6? No. But is he one of those third-line players that everybody says he's indispensable and you can't trade him? Maybe. And that's kind of how I see him right now.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say he's kind of like a Ridley Craig, but there's some driving everyone nuts ability that he has that Ridley Craig had in his draft year, and obviously he still has it in with the Senators. And he's a bit like Craig. He's a really good skater, not afraid to drop the glove if needed. So we'll see. We'll see if we're right about him, but he's obviously he's going to be back in Sudbury this season, and with a bigger role. Didn't really have a big role last year in Sudbury. Most of the first half he was on the third line, and then moved to the second line after the Christmas holidays. And so it's going to be interesting to see how he does. Obviously, there's some pretty talented player ranked just after him, but we do love the compete that this player has, and he does play the type of game that will, he's going to be successful come playoff time, and it's also the type of game that NHL team are looking to add to their team. Let's say come trade deadline, they're always looking for a player that can add, much needed grit to their team. So, like I said, he's a really good skater. Like, he can really fly on the ice. If you look at the ratings here that we have for him, a 7 for skating and 8 for compete. So that's pretty good. You can even argue skating is an 8, but we'll see. We'll see how much progress he can even make even more this season with that. So, and one guy maybe that's going maybe a bit underrated on that prospect pool is Oscar Fisker Molgaard. He was their second round pick last summer, 52nd overall. Really, really nice player. Probably not super well known, but that guy could move up that list. Over the course of the season, he might move up on that list because he's a really smart hockey player, and not well known because he doesn't play for. He does play in Sweden, but he's not for international tournament, he doesn't play on a top, hockey country. So it's going to be interesting to see how he does this upcoming season. But keep an eye on him. He's pretty underrated, I find. Let's move to Vancouver, Brad. I think they're missing. It shows that maybe they have not had a lot of draft picks recently, because their prospect pool is a bit. It doesn't have a lot of depth here. Obviously, the top two guys, Willander and Lekkerimäki, both from Sweden, are their top two prospect, but they are also not like perfect prospect. There's some work that needs to be done with those two guys. Obviously, Lekkerimäki has a crazy shot, but I think for him to have success at the NHL level, he's going to have to add a bit more layers to his game. Becoming, obviously physically, he's going to have to get stronger, and he's going to have to play a better game away from the puck. And Willander, maybe Brad, you want to touch on him a little bit, but I know that's a guy you have watched a lot in his draft year and even last year.
Yeah, I got to see him live a couple times, and Willander, listen, brilliant skater. Right, that's why Vancouver took him where they did. He's a brilliant skater. I like the development route. There's no problem going to college hockey, getting used to North American game early. The big issue with Willander, and this was the issue in his draft season, and I think it was underpronounced when you see him play internationally, but then you see him in league play, and you saw a lot more of this, which was his handling rates would fall apart. So in J20, I say he had some of the worst execution rates I've seen with his handling, even at mid-speed, let alone top speed, when he was in transition or under pressure, specifically under pressure, and when in top speed in transition. But again, just in general, not great. And this past season, when I've watched him, they have not improved. So that's a major red. That's a big one. That's a real problem, and it honestly makes a bit of sense, because from a coordination perspective, you look at the kid's size. It's not like he's 6'5" or 6'6", so there's not going to be a developmental delay in his coordination from that perspective. So kind of what you see is what you get with his handling. So that's going to kind of change how he's going to have to operate, I think, at the NHL level relative to some expectations. I know for some people, you look at where he was drafted and you're probably thinking, well, maybe he's a top pairing defenseman. Maybe he's a number one defenseman if everything goes right. I think that's incredibly unlikely. I think he's much more of a second pairing defender who's more of a puck mover, has to rely on his skating ability. And really his first pass, he has to, the big thing with this player is he has to move the puck quickly. That's the main thing, and do it either way, skating, through his playmaking, because he's not somebody who's going to be able to break down lines or break down an incoming forecheck with his handling nearly to the degree that I think was expected. So that's one of the big issues with Willander. Speaking of Lekkerimäki, to Jerome's point, like, this is a player who needs to have an ancillary skill set, meaning some sort of secondary trait that allows him to be something more than just a scorer. He's a decent playmaker, but for me, it comes down to understanding how to handle physical pressure in a way where it allows him to create more space for himself. That's not going to be learned in Sweden. That's one of the issues when you have a player who plays in the SHL for any extended period of time. So I'm really glad that he's come over to the A. I think that's going to really help accelerate his development and make him realize that he's going to have to put on significant weight. And hopefully he has some more natural instincts in him when it comes to understanding how to react dynamically to resistance, so that he can create space off of cross checks when he's turned his back to the opponent and he's trying to peel off of pressure, as an example. So they're intriguing players, but there's definitely some flags with those players. But if I was to highlight anybody in this organization right now, where I would go, that's a dark horse player, I'm going to bring up Nikita Tolopilo, who's a Belarusian goalie. I know for a lot of you, it's like, who is that? Where did he come from? So he was a very raw goalie that accelerated his development playing in UNO system over in Belarus. So he's playing pro hockey at a pretty young age. Then he got a couple of games up in the KHL. Then he ended up in the Allsvenskan. When he was in the Allsvenskan, his second year, he took off. That's when he became one of the better goalies in the league. That's when he came under the radar of the Canucks and they signed him. The big thing with Tolopilo is if you actually take his season as a whole and you remove Artur Silov's playoff run and you just take their regular seasons, the AHL, Tolopilo was the better goalie. I'll be the first to say it. I have no problem. I've seen 30 games of him each. I have no problem saying it. Tolopilo was that good in some games. The big thing with Tolopilo is the consistency rates aren't there yet, but he is a freak in net. So he's 6'6", 230. And like, I know for like, if this was 10 years ago, that would really mean something. Now almost every goalie's like 6'5", 6'6". But the big thing with his athleticism is at 6'6", 230, he has the fastest micro adjustment rates in small areas that out of any goalie I've tracked that is of that size. That is very significant. It could make him at least a backup in the NHL. But there were some performances last year where he absolutely looked like he was tracking to be maybe even an NHL starter. It's just all about his rate of consistency, his mental maturity, his ability to get comfortable with more reps. He's going to get a ton of playing time here with Thatcher Demko's situation. So look for him to potentially take off in the A. I think he's a much more significant upside than Jiri Patera. So I expect him to take the role from Patera to start the season and look for Telopilo to do some big things.
Yeah. If we look at maybe some other guys on that list, I mean, Aatu Räty was a guy that was, project as maybe even first overall pick in his draft year, 2 years before his actual draft year. And that's the danger of doing this sometimes. Some guys really develop really early, and that was Ratu's case. Just never really got better after his 16 years old season. And, we took some people were a bit critical of our ranking of him in 2021 when we ranked him 56. But then he went 52 in the draft. So we're not really far off, obviously. I mean, the Islanders definitely like him more than we did, drafting him, 52. That means they had him pretty high still on their list. But, if you look at overall, that was a big fall for him. And this is not like the first time this happens. This happens all the time with some prospect that gets maybe, overhyped when they're 15, 16 years old. I saw this in Montreal with Joseph Veleno. He was, getting a lot of hype when he was 14, 15 here in Montreal. And then you watch him at 17, you're like, well, he has not really progressed here. He's still kind of the same player. And now he's just, he's going to play in the NHL because he can really skate and he works really hard. And that's Räty. Räty is going to be not exactly like that, but he has a chance to be, still a depth player at the NHL level. Can he be a third line center? Still to be seen. I'm not exactly sold on it. But yeah, that's a danger sometimes with the player that are getting overhyped when they're 14, 15, 16 years old. Sometimes they just stop developing, and that's a bit what happened with Räty. Maybe another guy here, Melvin Fernström out of Sweden. That's a guy we really liked. We really liked last year, and we actually thought of. So we rank in 55. Well, we actually thought that we could move in up a lot higher than that on our list. But the only question we had was the skating. The skating was holding us back a bit on ranking him. Maybe at the top of our, maybe between 30 and 40. That's where we were at some point thinking of, ranking him. Watching him at the U18, we were like, the skating might need a bit too much work here. So like there's some risk involved in that. But if he really improves his skating, that might end up being a pretty good pick by the Canucks. I don't know, Brad, if you want to add something on Fernström.
Sure. Well, I'll add something about this organization in general. If you look at Lekkerimaki, Aatu Räty, Fernström, they're not great skaters. Danil Klimovic, they're all not. Vasily Podkolzin also in his draft year, not considered a great skater. They don't mind taking players that need developmental work in skating, and that's okay. There's other organizations that do that too. Toronto has no problem doing that. Tampa Bay, I think, is the best case study in the game about that. They have no issue taking players like Huhtinen, who's just an awful skater, and trying to make it work. So you look at the Winnipeg Jets, who we'll talk about, like totally different philosophy. You look at the Jets, unbelievable skaters. Vancouver, kind of the opposite. So it just shows you kind of a philosophical contrast in terms of what they're willing to develop and how.
Okay, let's move on to Vegas. Obviously, Vegas, if you look at which will be the last team we're going to talk about for this episode, Trevor Conley, obviously the number one ranked prospect on our prospect pool. Sapovaliv is a guy that our boss Mark Edwards really like out of the OHL. Very smart, 6'4" center. Obviously, this skating was a bit of an issue in his draft year, as it has gone a bit better, but still, it's going to be interesting how he does at the pro level this season. Vegas is never known to have a ton of prospect in their AHL team, so him and Brendan Brisson will be key players unless Brisson makes Vegas full time. Pavel Mosevic was our second ranked goalie this past draft year, so he's a guy that we like. Matthew Cataford, a guy from the Q that I've seen quite a lot. Really smart player. Just the skating is maybe it's holding him back a bit. So an interesting top 10 here. Obviously, Lucas Cormier, another defenseman out of the Q, had a great first year in the AHL. Struggled a lot last year. And he's a smaller D. Vegas, they don't really play their smaller D. They don't have any usually. They're you always have a huge D core. And also, if you look at the top 10 here, 2 goalie at the number 9 and 10 spot, Carl Lindbaum, Akira Schmidt. Brad, anybody you want to mention here?
Well, I'm with you. Matthew Cataford for me is the real wild card on in their pool, because I'm with you. I think he's super well rounded. He's smart. He does a whole lot of things properly. He doesn't mind the dirty areas. He's physical. He gets it. He's one of those kids that just gets hockey. But it's all about the skating development. If he can get another gear to him, then he could be a very useful impact player for Vegas long term. That's a bit under the radar. I'll say a couple things about it. So Vegas, one is that their goaltending, I think, is very deep. If you take Moisevich, Schmid, Lindbaum, that's a very good 1, 2, 3 coming in. Admittedly, Lindbaum is a player I might have missed on. He was in the COVID pause, so I didn't get to see a ton of him. But what I did see, I didn't really like. I didn't like him last year either, and I thought he would struggle in the SHL. Then he was like the best goalie ever in the SHL. But then he finally fell apart a bit at the end. So there's part of me that, listen, I got to bolt my closet door shut the amount of skeletons that are going to come out of it. I'm just hoping Lindbaum doesn't have to be added to the list. What I find fascinating is that my comparable for Akira Schmid was Pavel Moisevich. Now they're both in the same organization, and they like that style of goalie. That's what Adin Hill is. Adin Hill is a big blocking style goalie who reads the game very well and keeps everything contained and tries to get everybody to be composed around him. He's not a chaotic, sporadic goalie by any stretch. So it's interesting seeing their general philosophy towards the position, because it's one that's actually dying. And now that doesn't mean it should die, but it's a lot of organizations are looking for the hyper athletes, right? The San Jose just got Askarov for a reason. That's a freak of freaks when it comes to athletic component of the game. A lot of teams are looking to hone in on that specifically, but that doesn't mean there isn't, like, Connor Hellebuyck's not that athletic. He's still Connor Hellebuyck, right? So there's still give and take there depending on how you view the position. The other thing I'll say about Vegas's depth and how I view them is that they have a ton of specialization, which I think is the direction the game is heading. So you look at Mateus Sopovilov, one of the best defensive specialists we've ever scouted. That's what he will be. He will be in a remarkable shutdown presence in playoff hockey. That's what he'll be known for. Trevor Conley, obviously incredibly dynamic talent. He's an offensive force of nature. He is the exact opposite player of Mateus Sopovilov. And then you look at Artu Karki, for instance, offensive defenseman who's got a remarkable shot from the line, but really struggles defensively. Caden Korzak's the exact opposite. He's a shutdown guy. So they have a ton of unique specialization, not a ton of well-rounded players with the exception of Matthew Cataford. And I guess you could put Brendan Brisson into that equation, but Brisson, we'll wait and see for me on that. But it's an interesting organization in terms of what they have.
I think that's going to wrap up episode number 1 here on the Pacific Division. We're going to be back tomorrow with the Central Division with a lot of more pretty cool prospect to talk about. So we're going to see you tomorrow. And don't forget to, if you want, you can like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's going to be tons of video by us and our team all year long. So subscribe to us, and we'll be back tomorrow with the Central Division.